if you read books that describe the habits of brilliant people, like writers, they do control that sensory experience in the hours after wake. Like many writers, they have a particular habit of several hours early in the morning of actual writing. They don't do anything else for the rest of the day, but they control. They're very sensitive to noises and so on. I think they make it very difficult to live with them. I'm definitely like that. Like I I love to control the sensory, how much information is coming in. There's something about the peaceful, just everything being peaceful. At the same time, and we're talking to a mutual friend of Whitney Cummings, who has a mansion, a castle on top of a cliff in the middle of nowhere. She actually purchased her own island. So she wants silence. She wants to control how much sound is coming in.
And she's very sensitive to sound and environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful home and environment, but like clearly puts a lot of attention into details. Yeah. And very creative.
Yeah. And that allows her creativity to flourish. I don't like, that feels like a slippery slope. So I enjoy introducing noises and signals and training my mind to be able to tune them out, because I feel like you can't always control the environment so perfectly, because your mind gets comfortable with that. I think it's a skill that you want to learn to be able to shut it off. Like I often go to, like back before COVID, to a coffee shop. It really annoys me when there's sounds and voices and so on, but I feel like I can train my mind to block them out. So it's a balance, I think.
Yeah, and I think two things come to mind as you're saying this. First of all, yeah, I mean, we're talking about what's best for work is not always what's best for completeness of life. I mean, autism is probably many things. Like when we hit autism, just like there are probably 50 ways to get a fever. There are probably 50 ways that the brain can create what looks like autism, or what people call autism. But there's an interesting set of studies that have come out of David Ginty's lab at Harvard Med, looking at, these are mouse mutants where these are models for autism where nothing is disrupted in the brain proper and in the central nervous system, but the sensory neurons, the ones that innervate the skin and the ears and everything, are hypersensitive, and this maps to a mutation in certain forms of human autism. Mm-hmm. So this means that the overload of sensory information and sensory experience that a lot of autistics feel, that they can't tolerate things, and then they get the stereotype behaviors, the rocking and the kind of the shouting. We always thought of that as a brain problem. In some cases it might be, but in many cases it's because they just can't, they seem to have it's like turning the volume up on every sense. And so they're overwhelmed, and none of us want to become like that. I think it's very hard for them, and it's hard for their parents and so forth. So I like the coffee shop example, because the way I think about trying to build up resilience, physically or mentally or otherwise, is one of, I guess we could call it, I like to call it limbic friction. That's not a real scientific term, and I acknowledge that. I'm making it up now because I think it captures the concept, which is that, we always hear about resilience. It makes it sound like, under stress where everything's coming at you, you're going to stay calm. But there's another, so the limbic system wants to pull you in some direction, typically in the direction of reflexive behavior. And the prefrontal cortex, through top-down mechanisms, has to suppress that and say, no, we're not going to respond to the banging of the coffee cups behind me, or I'm going to keep focusing. That's pure top-down control. So limbic friction is high in that environment. You put yourself into a high limbic friction environment, meaning that the prefrontal cortex has to work really hard. But there's another side to limbic friction too, which is when you're very sleepy, there's nothing incoming. It can be completely silent. And it's hard to engage and focus because you're drifting off and you're getting sleepy. So their limbic friction is high, but for the opposite reason, autonomic arousal is too low. So they're turning on Netflix in the background or looping a song might boost your level of alertness that will allow top-down control to be in exactly the sweet spot you want it. So this is why earlier I was saying it's all about how we feel inside relative to what's going on the outside. We're constantly in this. I guess one way you could envision it spatially, especially if people are listening to this just on audio, is I like to think about it kind of like a glass barbell, where one sphere of perception and attention can be on what's going on with me, and one sphere of attention can be on what's going on with you or something else in the room or in my environment. But this barbell isn't rigid. It's not really glass.
Mhm.
Would plasma work here? I don't know anything about plasma. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
so imagine that this thing can contort. The size of the globes at the end of this barbell can get bigger or smaller. So let's say I close my eyes and I bring all my experience into what's going on through interoception internally. Now it's as if I've got two orbs of perception just on my internal state, but I can also do the opposite and bring both orbs of perception outside me. I'm not thinking about my heart rate or my breathing. I'm just thinking about something I see. And what you'll start to realize as you kind of use this spatial model is that two things. One is that it's very dynamic, and that the more relaxed we are, the more these two orbs of attention, the two ends of the barbell, can move around freely. The more alert we are, the more rigid they're going to be tethered in place. Mm-hmm. And that was designed so that if I have a threat in my environment, it's tethered to that threat. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, if something's coming to attack me, I'm not going to be like, oh, my breathing cadence is a little bit quick. Yeah. That's not how it works. Why? Because both orbs are linked to that threat. And so my behavior is now actually being driven by something external, even though I think it's internal. And so I don't want to get too abstract here because I'm a neuroscientist, I'm not a theorist. But when you start thinking about models of how the brain works, there are only really three things that neurons do. They're either sensory neurons, they're motor neurons, or they're modulating things. And the models of attention and perception that we have now, 2020, tell us that we've got interoception and exteroception. They're strongly modulated by levels of autonomic arousal. And that if we want to form the optimal relationship to some task or some pressure or something, whether or not it's sleep, an impending threat, or coding, we need to adjust our internal space-time relationship with the external space-time relationship. And I realize I'm repeating what I said earlier, but we can actually assign circuitry to this stuff. It mostly has to do with how much limbic friction there is, how much you're being pulled to some source. That source could be internal. If I have pain, physical pain in my body, I'm going to be much more interoceptive than I am exteroceptive. You could be talking to me and I'm just going to be thinking about that pain. It's very hard. And the other thing that we can link it to is top-down control, meaning anything in our environment that has a lot of salience will tend to bring us into more exteroception than interoception. And again, I don't want to litter the conversation with just a bunch of terms, but what I think it can be useful for people is to do what essentially you've done, Lex, is to start developing an awareness. When I wake up, am I mostly in a mode of interoception or exteroception? When I work well, what does working well look like from the perspective of autonomic arousal? How alert or calm am I? What kind of balance between internal focus and external focus is there? And to sort of watch this process throughout the day.